Stage Left Planet, and I'm your host, Warita Winbush. Today's episode is Tales from the Hood. KKK Comeuppance, was it a forewarning of the Biden to come? KKK Comeuppance is a story in Rusty Cundiff's 1995 horror movie Tales from the Hood, which starred Corbin Burnson as Senator Duke Metger and Roger Gumbel Smith as his public relations and image consultant Rhodie Willis, a black elitist, who are working to get Duke elected as governor. They are working to get Duke elected as governor. Duke's fledgling campaign is marred by his history of racism, including his past membership with the Ku Klux Klan. Indeed, he struggles to appeal to black, liberal, and moderate voters due to his continued callous attitudes towards race, class, and social issues that disenfranchise people and truly anyone can experience. His most offensive action is the pride that he takes in one of his great grandfathers having been a slave owner who killed his slaves, massacred his slaves, rather than let them be free when the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. His campaign headquarters, the mansion of his grandfather's plantation, was protested by many. Many were against him having his campaign headquarters there, the presidential connection. Many assumed, especially at the time Tales in the Hood debuted in 1995, that Duke is a caricature of David Duke, Louisiana Klansman politician. However, looking at the political landscape, a politician to which he is very similar is Joe Biden. That's right, it's Joe Biden. Though this probably wasn't Condi's intent. However, God is in control. Biden has a long history of being an opportunistic racist politician. For years, he forged alliances with the infamous racist politicians such as Strom Thurmond and Robert Byrd. A large portion of the legislation that he created was aimed to target blacks, Hispanics, poor whites, as well as other disenfranchised and marginalized people. Due to their own racist elitism, incompetence, and apathy, Duke and Biden struggled to charm voters. Duke couldn't win with a team of PR representatives that included the high society intellectual, very black Rhodie as his lead PR representative and image consultant. About his election, now, this is in reference to Joe Biden. About his election, Biden said, "We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics." Freudian, maybe? Who knows? I repeat that though. Joe Biden said, "We have put together the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics." I have a link to the video of him saying this in the article that accompanies this video. Duke Metger and Joe Biden, let's look at their other common characteristics. Both are callous, racist politicians who are proud of the racism that marred the history of the United States, the South, and the Confederacy, and needed PR rehabilitation and image consulting to change the public's perception of them as a result. When Back was pandering to Latinos for votes, Biden's low opinion of black people hadn't changed much. He stated, and by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things. Wow, it doesn't seem like his vocabulary is very diverse whatsoever. Nothing he said insinuated that he could find synonyms for the word different. And I'm glad that I was a notable exception as a black person who did not vote for him. Yes, indeed. And Joe Biden said this in the speech that he given on August 6th, 2020. And I have a link to the video in which he states that in the article that accompanies this video. Also, read the articles which are included in this article that accompanies this video. Biden praised segregationist Strom Thurmond as closet friend who believed in heterogeneous, diverse society. Biden, and also this one, Biden, in 2007 on segregationist Senator James Eastland. He was flattered by the deference I showed him. And also, deep personal relationships. Joe Biden's 6 segregationist friends. Excuse me. Both have public relations representatives with red hair, meaning Duke, Metger, and Joe Biden. Red-headed Jen Psaki was Biden's prior press secretary to current red-headed press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Both had public relations representatives named Jen. Biden's former press secretary is Jen Psaki. His White House deputy chief of staff is Jennifer O'Malley Dillon. Both had staff members named Bruce. When Biden was vice president, Bruce Reed was appointed his chief of staff. Both reached out to black people to neutralize their public perceptions, the public perception of their racist past. Duke reached out to Rhodie. Biden reached out to Simone Sanders, Kamala Harris, Karine Jean-Pierre. Both, and Obama as well, right? He invoked Obama's name to gain the support of black voters. Aside from putting his foot in his mouth and saying, you ain't black if you don't vote for him, if you don't vote for Biden. Both showed that they were, Duke Metger and Jill Biden, both showed that they were against the idea of reparations for black people. You gotta watch Tales from the Hood to see that scene at which he says, no reparations. Duke Metger say, no reparations, no reparations for you. It ain't funny. It's just the irony of the situation, the surrealness of it is just weird. It's odd. It's anyway, Joe Biden's political career moves. In addition to proudly working with segregationists, Joe Biden worked against black civil rights and equity policies Joe Biden has built his career by fighting against equity and equality. Joe Biden was vehemently against black youth and school desegregation, and he created mass incarceration drug legislation that contributed to the growth of privatized prisons in which those working within the penal system could invest. Joe Biden was a proponent of cutting Social Security, and Joe Biden voted against, no, yeah, he voted against bankruptcy protection against, well, for student loans. He voted against bankruptcy protection for student loans. Now, these are things that were not divulged by the mainstream media until he was asked to step down as being the candidate to run against Donald Trump. No, yeah, Donald Trump in 2020 for the 2020 election. Then the mainstream media, more at the it seems at the behest of the Democrat Party, tried to tell the public about Joe Biden's past, but at that point it was too late. Now let's talk about him working against black civil rights and equity policies. And his and it being the foundation upon which he built his career. He by fighting against equity and equality. Read this article, and the link is included in the article that accompanies this video. It's called Bunch of Poppycock. Biden once rejected the idea that diversity was America's strength. Joe Biden was vehemently against black youth and school desegregation. And also, let's talk about this because this ties into him being against civil rights and equity and equality. In the Washington Post, Biden's tough talk on 1970 school desegregation plan could get new scrutiny in today's Democratic Party. He stated, I do not buy the concept. We have suppressed the black man for 300 years, and the white man is now far ahead. Thus, we must now give the black man a head start or hold the white man back to even the race. I don't buy that. That is what he stated. And this type of racist rhetoric he spoke not long after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I must say, I don't think the white man should be held back to even the race, but I also think that barriers that were put in place due to put in place by systemic racism should be removed as obstacles for the black man and woman and anyone else who was impacted by them. And Joe sounds stupid saying he don't buy the concept that we have suppressed the black man for three. What country was he living in? And also, Joe Biden worried in 1977 that desegregation policies would cause his children to grow up in a racial jungle. And his old comments from then came to the fore when he said, look, came to the fore as saying that non-orderly racial integration policies would cause his children to grow up in a racial jungle. I mean, he said, unless we do something about this, My children are going to grow up in a racial and going to grow up in a jungle. The jungle being a racial jungle with tensions having built so high that it's going to explode at some point. Now he made it seem as if he was looking at the tension and the tense racial relations that were occurring at the time. However, Joe didn't want white kids integrated into predominantly black schools, and he definitely didn't want his kids to have to attend those schools, predominantly black schools. He said this in the article how Joe Biden became the Democrats' anti-busing crusader. He said, "This is a real problem with busing," Mr. Biden went on. "You take people who aren't racist, meaning white people who are good citizens, people who believe in equal education and opportunity, and you stunt their children's intellectual growth by busing them to an inferior school, and you're going to fill them with hatred. And what about the black student from Wilmington East Side? You send him to Alexis I. DuPont, bust him through Centerville every day, then send him back to the ghetto. How can he be encouraged to love his white brothers?" Boy, Biden tried it, but it didn't work. We got what he meant. And he then went on from there in his career. He went on a tirade against black youth, yelling things such as lock the SOBs up, and giving speeches such as his Predators Beyond the Pale speech, which I've included a link to where I have it posted. You can watch it. It's in my article that accompanies this video. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Now, I tell you, he did this beyond predators on our streets who were beyond the pale. He gave that speech in 1993 to gain support for the passage of the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, which is mostly known as the 1994 Crime Bill. Hillary Clinton even made a Predators Beyond the Pale speech in 1996. She was being a hypocrite because although the predators of whom she spoke should be held accountable for their actions, she was able to have that platform to say that, as well as build a political career of her own on the strength of her husband being the president of the United States, Bill Clinton. He was the leader of the free world. Now, Joe Biden created mass incarceration drug legislation that contributed to the growth of privatized prisons in which those working within the penal system could invest. Biden focused on the creating of bills, including the 1994 crime bill, that were designed to target persons with low incomes, black people, and Hispanics, which began, and this began his crime crusade. His crime bill crusade began with one of his first mass incarceration drug acts, which was the Comprehensive Control Act that he'd written with Strom Thurmond in 1984, openly racist, openly segregationist Senator Strom Thurmond in 1984, even though he had a black daughter that he did not really let make known to the public, I'll say. Jamel Boo is Joe Biden's Joe Biden presidential run. Why it's a bad idea. Jamel Boui's article names Joe's Crime Control Act. The link is included in the article that accompanies this video. Please go and read it. Here's the list. The Comprehensive Control Act, which was, as stated, written in 1984, and the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988, and the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, which we know as the 1994 Crime Bill. Now, let's go over it. The Comprehensive Control Act was spearheaded by Biden and Senator Strom Thurmond. Expanded drug trafficking penalties and federal civil asset forfeiture, which allows police to seize and absorb someone's property, whether cash, cars, guns, or something else, without proving the person is guilty of a crime, which means that they can basically go in and steal people's stuff. And the person is not innocent until proven guilty. Under the federal equitable sharing program, local and state police get up to 80% of the value of what they seize as funds for their departments, which critics say creates a for-profit incentive to steal people's stuff if they aren't guilty, and to take people's stuff, whether they're guilty or not. Now, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 was sponsored and partly written by Biden and ratcheted up penalties for drug crimes. It also created a big sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine, even though both drugs were pharmacologically similar. The law made it so someone would need to possess 100 times the amount of powder cocaine to be eligible for the same mandatory minimum sentence for crack. Since crack is more commonly used by Black Americans, this sentencing disparity helped fuel the disproportionate rates of imprisonment among Black communities. I say hold accountable those who are engaging in crack dealing and the possession of crack, right? However, hold those who are engaging in cocaine dealing and cocaine possession equally. Hold them equally accountable. However, Hunter Biden has written about his cocaine addiction as well. Now, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988 was co-sponsored by Biden and strengthened prison sentences for drug possession. They didn't strengthen anything for Hunter Biden. Enhanced penalties for transporting drugs, and established the Office of National Drug Control Policy, which coordinates and leads federal anti-drug efforts. Now, the act that's most popularly known is the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, the 1994 Crime Bill. Now, partly written by Biden and signed by President Bill Clinton, imposed tougher sentences, including some mandatory minimums. I was about to say tougher sentences, including some mandatory minimums, and increased funding for prisons, fostering the explosive growth of the U.S. prison population from the 90s through the 2000s, a trend that's only begun to reverse in the past few years. Since Black Americans are disproportionately likely to be incarcerated, the law helped contribute to the mass incarceration of Black Americans. In particular, hold on, let me get adjusted because my legs starting to hurt. Ooh. All right, here we go. But the law also included all sorts of other measures which were good, including Violence Against Women Act that helped crack down on domestic violence and rape, a 10-year ban on assault weapons, funding for firearm background checks, and grant programs for local and state police. Now, the RAVE Act. Okay, the RAVE Act was written in 2003 and built on the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 to impose civil penalties on businesses that knowingly lease, rent, use, or profit from a space where illicit drugs are being stored, manufactured, distributed, or used. The idea was to go after raves in which drugs are widely used, but the law has been widely criticized for making rave organizers so paranoid about anti drug crackdowns that look about anti-drug crackdowns that they stopped doing anything that would implicate them in drug use, including providing medical or educational services for drug users. Bill de Blasio tried to warn black voters of Joe Biden's past. Please read, and I included the link to that article, to this particular article in the article that accompanies this video. Bill de Blasio suggests black voters do not know enough about Joe Biden's record, and he was quoted as saying, "It stands to reason that people have a certain amount of information, and I don't blame them for this. I understand it," de Blasio said on the show before a host, Elise Jordan, sought clarification from him on his comment, according to the New York Times. And she asks, "So you're saying," and this is what was terrible, because de Blasio made a good point that black people were voting for Biden based on information that was made available to them, information that they knew about Biden, especially through the mainstream media. But Jordan asked, "So you're saying they were low information?" And de Blasio responded, "No, no, no. I'm saying you had a whole lot of candidates, which I think is a very different discussion. The information that I think people received about Joe Biden was some of his historic connection, which understandably means something to people. And he means that his connection to Obama, it kept being reinforced, his being Obama's former vice president, to gain black people's support for him. Now, Joe Biden was a proponent of cutting Social Security. He lied about his record on Social Security. There's an article included in this, a link to an article included in this one, that states Joe lied about his record on Social Security. Now, here's some Biden quotes on Social Security from factcheck.org. On January 31st, 1995, he stated, "When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits." Yeah, he said, "I meant veterans benefits. I mean, every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice, I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time. Somebody has to tell me in here how we are going to do this hard work without dealing with any of those sacred cows, some deserving more protection than others. I'm not quite sure how you get from here to there. I am sure that we should tell the American people straight up that such an amendment is going to require some big changes." In November 16, 1995, he said, I introduced the Balanced Budget Amendment in 1984 that got nowhere. I am a Democrat that voted for the constitutional amendment to balance the budget. I have introduced on four occasions, entire plans to balance the budget, knowing I am not president and I am not the leader, but for illustrative purposes or illustrative purposes. I tried with Senator Grassley back in the 1980s to freeze all government spending, including Social Security, including everything. Now, again, on January 31st, 1995, Joe Biden said, the Balanced Budget Amendment makes no provision whatsoever for the unique characteristics of the Social Security Trust Fund. Instead, it treats Social Security revenues and outlays as ordinary federal budget. This means in the years that Social Security is generating hundreds of billions of dollars in surplus revenues, it will be used to cover hundreds of billions of dollars worth of deficits that the rest of the federal budget is creating. After 2014, when the trust fund goes into deficit to the tune of tens or hundreds of billions of dollars a year, we in Congress will have to cut that much from the rest of the budget to make up for the deficit. What does it mean? It means that for the next 20 years or so, revenues from the Social Security Trust Fund will make it look like we have balanced the budget, when in fact we have not. And after that, the huge outlays from the trust fund will force drastic reductions in the rest of the federal spending or drastic reductions in Social Security. That show didn't age well, did it? Considering the United States, the under the leadership with the being led by the Biden administration, is sending billions, trillions of dollars to the Ukraine so that they can fight Russia. The United States is sending billions, trillions of dollars to the Ukraine to fight Russia in 2023. And this has been going on since 2022. Boy, that didn't age well. Now, on February 9, 1895, Biden said, it seems pretty clear to me this is about two things. One, they need the Social Security dollars to make the deficit look like it is less than it is. And then the next step is they are going to need to try to deal with changing it to increase the amount of money they get in the trust funds to make the deficits look even less, which means that Social Security is going to get hit. Boy, he's really fixated on that money, wasn't he? Real fixated, you know. It said he was like that in Delaware, too, making deals with various business, private sector entities, right? Now, the Simpson-Bowles Commission was created to negotiate the reduction of federal debt, which Bruce Reed, his chief of staff, the man he later selected as chief of staff when he was vice president, Bruce Reed was the staff director of the Simpson-Bowles Commission. Well, Simpson-Bowles Commission, like Camilla Parker Bowles. Bruce led the charge on their report, but failed to get support for the cuts to Social Security and other entitlements. But after, when Biden became vice president, he made Bruce Reed his chief of staff. That sure sounds a lot like Duke Mega when he called for Bruce. Jenny, is that you? Joe Biden voted against bankruptcy protection for student loans. Joe Biden called for student loan forgiveness these days, right? Yet he wrote legislation to, this is back in the 70s. He started this. He wrote legislation to base students into more loan debt, for which he later made it impossible to attain bankruptcy protection. Here are some examples. In 1978, Biden supported the Middle Income Student Assistance Act that made federal student loans available to all students regardless of income. In 1978, he also wrote legislation to prevent students from getting bankruptcy protections on those loans after graduation. In 1980, he voted for Parent Plus loans. In 1981, he voted for auxiliary loans to assist students. In 81, income restrictions were brought back, which placed a barrier for many people to be able to get student loans. Now, in 2005, the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act made it most difficult to attain Chapter 7 bankruptcy protections. Nathan J. Robinson gives an extensive exploration of Biden's career to warn against voting for him. You can find this on his Current Affairs website, and I've included a link to his article. Democrats, you really don't want to nominate Joe Biden. Now let's look at Rhodie Willis and Kamala Harris. Let's look at them. Let's look at them. Rhodey was so disconnected from the black masses that it barely bothered his conscience to be in the mansion where slaves were massacred to prevent them becoming free, gaining their freedom. His job was to make Duke look good, and that was his main focus. He even made a racist joke along with Duke, which sealed his fate. Kamala Harris is so disconnected from and tone deaf to the black community that she praised the sexually inappropriate rapper Cardi B, lied about being a Snoop Dogg fan in college. He hadn't even publicly debuted with Death Row Records, and if people knew of him, it was probably more than likely locally when she was in college. I mean, back at the time when she was in college, it was more than likely in the early 80s. In the early 80s, I would give her maybe, if she, like the movie School Days, around the time uh that class, though, that around the time that class would have been graduating, she may have been in school or about to graduate with along with them, perhaps like the mid to late 80s, I'm guessing. Let's see when old Kamala graduated college. Kamala Harris. Not to call her old, discriminate against her because of her age. I'm just saying, she was before Snoop the debut. She was before her time in college. Her college days was before the debut of Snoop Dogg. Unless she is referencing her college days in graduate school. Let's see. When when did she graduate? Let's see. See that? She graduated from Howard in 1986 with a degree in political science and economics. And she graduated law school in 1989 from UC Hastings. and then was admitted to the California bar in June 1990. Snoop Dogg. Let's check out Snoop Dogg. When did he debut with Death Row Records? Oh, somebody already. 1992. He debuted in 1982. Wait, he debuted in 1992. 1992. So yes, Kamala lied. All right. Let's see. Rhodie is a foreshadowing of Kamala Harris, both placing own agendas ahead of the well-being of others, particularly marginalized people groups, especially black folks. Both acknowledge the racism of their counterparts, yet continue to help them target black people. As they were practicing Duke's poise and responses for the press, Rhodey pretends to be Duke, while Duke plays the role of a reporter. Duke poses this question to Rhodey. I don't like acting weird. Okay, Duke poses this question to Rhodey. Aren't you scared of the dolls? You gotta see the movie to know about the dolls, but I will tell you this. The dolls were in that mansion and they were possessed. So, Duke poses this question to Rhodey. Aren't you scared of the dolls? And Rhodey answers, the only spooks I'm scared of are the ones with guns. Now Rhodey was joking around and afterwards gave him the right the the answer that Duke should respond. Should have given as a response. Then Rhodey met his fate. You have to see the movie. The scene in the movie. When running for the office of president against Joe Biden, Kamala Harris reminded America of Joe Biden's political past. And this is when Joe Biden was her competition because they both were running for president. She went so far as to say in an interview, let's see, in an interview with Kamala Harris on the campaign trail with Face the Nation, at 11 minutes and 35 seconds, she said, praising and coddling, referring to Joe Biden, praising and coddling individuals who made it their life's work, and built their reputation off of segregation of the races in the United States. I would not be a member of the United States Senate if those men he praised had their way. And I included a link to the interview. I embedded the interview in the article that accompanies this video, and I included the entire interview as well. It starts at 10 minutes and 53 seconds. However, Kamala Harris accepted his offer to be his vice president, though the requirements for the position were only to be black and a woman. He advertised for a token, and she accepted. Colorism seems to be a commonality between Rhodie Willis and Kamala Harris. They are the least black in terms of loyalty to the black community and being a reflection of traditional as well as socially engineered black culture and looks. When I say socially engineered, I mean stereotypical behavior that has been propagated as a norm, as normal behavior in the black community. said the way that they, and also in the way that they represent, I mean, the way that they present themselves and their predatory attitudes and disconnect towards black people, with predatory attitudes toward and disconnect from black people. Rhodie Willis seemed now to represent, he seemed to represent the stereotypical black Republican. He seems like the type of anti-black, self-hating black person who would pretend to help the black people improve their community by getting rid of as many black people as possible, using meritorious manumission, benign neglect, black codes, assimilationist eugenics, and colorism. However, that is not the modus operandi of most black Republicans. It is the modus operandi of most liberal black Democrats. Yes, it is. Okay, I feel my throat getting dry. Let me get something, get me some water going on here. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, let's see. Being rewarded. Now let's talk about meritorious manumission. It's being rewarded for hindering the independent progress of the black community. It was employed using tongue tie, implemented during slavery, and still is practiced. However, not so overtly. Meritorious manumission is a tool of white supremacy that reward and just plain elitism. I'm gonna say white supremacy and black elitism that rewarded blacks for subverting slave revolts, hindering the independent progress of the black community, as stated, and for saving the life of their master. And today, one would say their white benefactor, or whomever their benefactor is, because it could be an anti-black elitist as well, or someone from any other group. Constantly adapting to the times, the traitorous practices of meritorious manumission are still heavily ingrained into the socio-political culture of the black community. Many black celebrities, such as Gabrielle Union, and black members of the press, practice this. Gabrielle Union practices this when she takes roles as awful characters like Eva and Delivers from Eva, who are based on the angry black woman stereotype, as well as when she and others advocate for abortion to black people living in poverty, basically saying, okay, since you're living in poverty, then your living in poverty is the problem. So let's make sure that you and your progeny, your offspring, if not you, no, not you, but let's make certain that let's make certain that your offspring isn't living, because we don't want that poorness to get passed on to them as they have encounter problems or create problems as a result. Let's get rid of the problems, and you seem to be the cause or the main factor of the problem. Seems to be their attitude. And black codes. Let's discuss black codes. restricted black people's right to own property, conduct business, buy land and lease land, and move freely through public spaces. A central element of the black codes were vagrancy laws. States criminalized men who were out of work or who were not working at a job whites recognized. This made it difficult for entrepreneurs, and it also made it difficult for blacks to maintain high property values in their own communities as well. Because, like, for instance, if rioting, gang violence, and such were frequent occurrences in the black community, then black people basically, hey, that basically made it difficult for them to buy land and to buy land outside of their community and to lease land in their community, meaning to lease it out to other people, is my point. But it also made it difficult for them to buy and lease land outside of the community as well. And to move freely within public spaces. Now, we see now that there is a self segregation movement occurring within the black community where they are limited themselves to what they call safe spaces, and this makes it difficult for them to move in public spaces, right? Now, black people fought for the right to be able to move freely through public spaces, and now younger people who don't truly understand the past are fighting to be excluded from these public spaces. It is backwards. And they are being encouraged by black elitists such as Patrice Khan Coolers and black politicians and other black elitist leaders who can make a dime off of the social problems of the black community. Now, benign neglect. This is something that many black leaders do. They ignore problems that impact black people that are due to disenfranchisement by systemic racism. Barack Obama did this during both of his terms as president. He even made the racist segregation as Biden his vice president instead of like Biden, who specifically chose a black vice president and said he wanted a vice president that was black and female because they were black and female. And not saying that I condone that type of tokenism. The point is, Obama even made statements that the point is that Obama tried to remain as neutral as he possibly could, and made that effort by ignoring the problems that impacted the black community. He made it a point to focus on the issues of the gay community. Now, Obama didn't look at Joe Biden and say, you did look at Joe Biden's example, though I guess at that time when Joe made the offer, he was desperate to make his image over to appeal to voters so that they would elect him as president. But still, Obama said when asked what was he going to do for black people, he said he wasn't going to do anything specifically for black people. And Kamala Harris said she wasn't going to do anything specifically for black people when she was posed that question. Assimilationist eugenics. Let's discuss that. And I will say, for the information about meritorious manumission, benign neglected black codes, thank you, Dr. Claude Anderson. I love the work that you've done and the information, the education that you shared with us, and I've learned more from you there having been a sociology and criminal justice and history student at HBCU, Southern University and A&M College. Though I did learn a lot in Dr. Dan Quall's West African History courses. I love that class. Now, assimilationist eugenics promotes the ideology that the best of each race should procreate with one another to create a stronger human race. Considered to be the apex of integration into mainstream society because it is considered to be the apex of integration into mainstream society because it meant total acceptance as well as overcoming what that many black elitists had perceived to be, and some still perceive to be, the stigma of blackness by erasing blackness. I wrote an article, and the link is included in this article about it. Sociogenomics, the next phase of assimilation is eugenics. Colorism. Color cast is a color cast hierarchical system which bases one's class standing in society upon race and skin tone. It's like an intra-group racism, intra-group racism. This behavior most closely represents many black liberal Democrat politicians. This behavior, meaning all of the things mentioned, as stated, most closely represents many black liberal Democrat politicians whose credo is forget God and uphold multicultural pagan ideals instead. Advance the abortion industry. Euthanasia gotta maintain that quality of life to rid society of people who need assistance with problems, not to be told, oh, you poor, oh, you crazy, oh, you got a disability, go kill yourself. Those people don't need to be told that. Those people need assistance. They don't need to be offered euthanasia or assisted suicide. And let's see. Also, the credo of many black liberal politicians is normalization of promiscuity, normalization of destructive alternative lifestyles, the stigmatizing of traditional marriage and family, and the normalization of addiction and substance abuse. Let's look at Kamala Harris's career moves. When running for president, if elected, Kamala Harris promoted eliminating private insurance. There's a link to an article discussing her promise or her thoughts on that. And this would be disastrous for people who had private insurance. And also, it would remove the privacy aspect of your information, thus making your medical information available to, accessible to the government and who knows who else. And she also promoted decriminalizing prostitution at the federal level and decriminalizing marijuana possession at the federal level. Though she was a hawk on marijuana possession, a hawk against marijuana possession when she was California's Attorney General. Like Biden, Kamala Harris's political history shows a track record of oppression. While she was in office as Attorney General, Harris blocked the release of inmates for cheap labor to do things such as fight wildfires. Okay, read the article that I included, in which I've included a link. Kamala Harris' office sought to keep inmates locked up so that California could use them for cheap labor. It also read how Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor. This is by Lara Bazelon, written January 17th, 2019, in the New York Times. She says that the senator was often on the wrong side of history when she served as California's Attorney General. Many black elitists proclaim that their hard work, dedication, and sacrifice were instrumental in their high achievement and success. And not just black elitists either, many elitists do that. In the contrary, they will also attribute their success to networking. It's about who you know, you know. And they also admit affairs and other informal activities and relationships that they have carried out. They don't call out the nepotism and the cronyism in which they participated for what it is. Kamala Harris touts degrees from Harvard University and USC, yet she rarely does she attribute her success to her affair with San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown. Former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown. Willie Brown himself has publicly stated and even warned her not to run for president because of her past. Because of her past. Her past, her career past and political past. Willie Brown has written 3 articles about his having elevated Kamala Harris up the career ladder by appointing her to various positions that would advance her political career, raising her to the office of California Attorney General, their top cop. Read. This is one article in particular, well, 2 of them. Former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown writes about dating Kamala Harris, appointing her to post. In fact, as Harris later tells San Francisco Weekly, tells the San Francisco Weekly, the mayor gave her a 1994 BMW, which she traded in for the 1997 model that she now drives, or that she drove at the time. And also read Kamala's Karma, which talks about her relationship with Willie Brown as well. Now, this has been Stage Left Planet. I'm your host, Warita Wimbush. Today's episode was Tales from the Hood. KKK Comeuppance. Was it a forewoman? Little forewoman. Forewarning of the battling to come. Please focus on God.